Okay, you see the gentleman in the back row looking at his watch, and here in Crestone we have a grace period. It's just about up. So there is Crestone time, such a thing as that here. Welcome everybody to the September. And there's some new faces I see in the crowd. So I'll mention that Shumei is an organization that has basically three underpinnings. And one of them is their spiritual practice of Jore, which is a channeling of light for good health and happiness. The second one is natural agriculture. And natural agriculture is food that's prepared without any chemical fertilizers or pesticides. And it's pretty pure. It's almost like raw food, that sort of agriculture. And the third one is fostering the appreciation of art and beauty. And that's where the artist symposia come in. And the music concerts that are scheduled here. And I'd like to introduce Deanna Wilfong. She is the organizer of the music events, and she's also the glue that holds the artist symposium together. She's part-time staff here at Shumei, and we couldn't do either one of these, I decided, at least for the artist symposium, without her. So, thank you. We've been doing these since about 2004. So we've had sculptors, painters, Tonka painters, icon painters, just about any and every art form.
Photographers.
Oh, photographers. Yeah. And a number of fiber artists. And I met Mara. I don't even know how we met. Maybe,
I think at one of your holiday.
Oh, the art show in December. Yeah. Okay, well, so I learned that she was an artist herself. And then when I saw her work, I thought, well, we have to get her up here to expose her to the community and the greater San Luis Valley. Many of the artists that we invite here have never given a presentation before, and it gives them an opportunity for themselves to organize their thoughts and say, why do I do what I do? And how can I explain what I do to other people? And oftentimes it's the first time they've ever had to do that. And then the other one, like I mentioned, is to expose the artist to people who are interested in art. So I'm not going to give a big introduction for Mara because I don't know that much about her. I read in the newspaper, but I also learned that she has a degree in fiber art from Colorado State. Fort Collins. So let me pass it off to you, and thank you very much for agreeing with it.
So thank you, Shumei. Thank you, Bill and Diana, for making this happen. And thank you, everybody, for coming out. It's going to be a nice day, but so maybe you're not missing so much. And I will say this isn't my first rodeo, but I should have said that after if it went well. So my background, the things that I think are pertinent. I grew up as a foreign service brat. So I lived in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, and in Europe, and traveled constantly. Still like to travel. For me, it's a way of taking me out of what I'm used to, and it kind of, it's just a huge impact visually to be in other cultures. Not even other cultures, but even like Nebraska, for example. So that's an important part of who I am. The other important part is that I did go to art school. It was in my first midlife crisis, and I went back and I have a degree in fine arts with a concentration in fiber arts. And the other thing that's important, I think, in how I see the world is that I worked for many years with software, but most recently with geospatial software. So that's computerized mapping and cartography. But I also spent a lot of hours, years, looking at satellite imagery of very interesting, they call them areas of interest. The Department of Defense calls them that. And collecting data that, to make maps. So kind of what you see behind, you don't see it, but what's behind things like Google Maps and, on your phone. So anyway, that really impacted how I look at things when I look out of an airplane window, for example. I can't fly without thinking, oh, there's a drainage, that's a primary stream, that's a tertiary stream, So that plays into my work as well. So that's kind of a little bit about me. One of the things, I learned a lot in art school, but some of the important things I learned were that fiber art can be art. Fiber art is kind of the stepchild to the art that's framed and behind glass or on pedestals. So fiber art can be art. The other thing I learned was that there's good art, and then there's a lot of other stuff that they don't talk about in art school because it's not worthy. And another thing I learned was, I forget. Oh yeah, the most important thing was not just how to look, but how to see. And really, anybody who's taken any kind of drawing class or anything, you have to retrain yourself to look at things like value and line and where edges are and things like that. So, and in a way, all the mapping that I did kind of confirmed a lot of that that process of how to look at things, how to group like with like, and how to analyze what it is that those photons that are hitting your retina. So, having said that, there are things I did not learn in art school. That one's for you guys. So there's an artist named Thomas Kincaid who's dead now, and he actually was a huge marketing success, huge. And he actually trademarked a title called Painter of Light. Now anyone that's taken art history knows that is Caravaggio, it's not Thomas Kincaid. However, he has trademarked it. So all bets are off for Caravaggio. But this piece, when I was looking for something about Thomas Kincaid, I came across this and I like this so much better. It's an artist, it's from a series called War on Kincaid. So he's added the Star Wars, attack vehicles. But Thomas Kincaid's work looks pretty much like what's on the left side of this. These sort of fantastically glowing cottages in surreal landscapes. And I'm not a fan. I have opinions, and that's one of them. However, I was walking in downtown Fort Collins one night, and there was a Thomas Kincaid gallery there. He's there all over the world, and even though he's dead, it's a huge business. And I stopped, we're looking in the window, and I have my inner dialogue going on, which was not very kind. And my friend is looking very hard at this stuff. And I said, what do you make of this, Jeff? He goes, I really like it. So, it was a good lesson for me. This is a guy who lived in a house where every wall was unadorned. And yet he could imagine something like that in his house and getting enjoyment and pleasure from it. So, we're all entitled to our experience. There is no bad art. You know, I try and keep my opinions to myself. Sometimes I succeed. But, so anyway, that was the moral of that story. Was I learned that kind of the hard way. The other thing I learned was, in art school, you have to talk about your work constantly. I don't really see the point in putting words to something that's visual. So I think that everyone's entitled to their experience. If you see a cow in that, that's great, you know, whether I intended it or not. So I tend to hopefully allow you to have your own experience of what you see of my work. And I don't know that anything I could say would make it any better. It might just make it worse. So, but if you want to ask questions, you know, I do have words. Okay, so I wanted to just show you some work that I really like. And in that process, maybe if you see what I like, you might see some similarity. I don't think this informs my work, but it informs the way that I see things. And so that's the purpose of putting some of this up here. So this is my all-time favorite piece of art on the planet. It's Cloud Gate by Anish Kapoor, and it's in Chicago's Millennium Park. If you've never seen it, it's worth a trip to Chicago just for that one thing.
One question. What's the surface that makes it reflect like that?
It's some kind of highly polished metal. And this is from one side. It actually is shaped like a kidney bean, so you can walk under it. And there's reflection above. And the scale of it, that's me, by the way. The scale of it is just monumental. You know, you can really kind of get lost in it. And then it changes constantly with the, you know, what's happening in the sky, how many people are there. It's just fantastic. So that's my favorite.
Is it mirror or is it transparent?
No, it's solid. It's metal. It's polished metal.
Yeah, it's my first impression when it was a
Yeah.
lens.
Yeah.
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 So every you know, you walk around this, you walk through it, and it reflects all these different parts of the city. And when there's snow on it, it's really cool. Yeah. Okay, so this is Donald Judd. This is in Marfa, Texas, in a place called the Chinati Foundation. It used to be an Air Force base that he bought so that he could display his work the way he wanted it displayed. And so, again, the way the light moves, the way the shadows move, the vantage point when you're looking at it obliquely versus straight on. These are concrete forms of his also on the land. This is Louise Nevelson. This is very large, but she did these like found object sculptures. And for me, I think they're kind of quilt-like in a way. You know, this idea of the grid and the organization within some structure. How many people have seen this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this is down the road in Antonito. And I love outsider art. So again, I think I have a thing with reflection. I'm like a magpie or something, shiny objects. But I just love this. You know, that this came out of somebody's head, you know, and manifested that way. This is Carhenge in Alliance, Nebraska. That's where I went for the eclipse. The totality went right over there. This is Edmund Wall. He's a potter who studied extensively in Japan. And his aesthetic, I think, is very spare. Much of his work is like this, these kind of lined up, very simple vessels. He also wrote a book, which I highly recommend, called The Hare with the Amber Eyes, about his family collection of Metsuke. I probably said that wrong. But fantastic read, very well written. Giorgio Branding. this artist just had a show that was based on this artist's work, and you can see the similarities. Egon Schiele, nobody does hands like Egon. Much of his work I probably wouldn't share on a screen in an open talk like this because it borders on naughty. But I love the way that he created fabric, or the drape and the fold and the texture. Richard Eugenkorn. Again, I think you start to see the constructs of line and form and color. Arshil Gorky. He's my all-time favorite artist. Not necessarily my favorite piece, but Robert Motherwell. Again, this idea of seeing the gesture of the artist made. You can almost sort of physically respond to that piece. I do. It's okay if you don't. This is a friend of mine in Santa Fe, Al McLaren. This is encaustic work on steel panels. A really luscious surface.
How big is that? A large?
They're small.
Oh.
I mean, she does really big pieces, but this one's relatively small. So yeah, if you ever go to Santa Fe, she's at the, what is it called, the GBG Gallery down off Canyon Road. Great artist. Jeff Wenzel, this is a friend of mine from Denver. He's the remedial work to Thomas Kincaid, by the way. Does anybody needs to know? Maybe Smith. Jeff Wenzel, yeah, okay. Okay, so those were things I liked. I mean, the rest of the stuff I like too, but now I'm going to focus a little bit more specifically on fiber art. And this sort of goes to that stepchild of fine art. So if you see an object as a bowl, it may inhibit seeing it as craft. And just as seeing it as craft might inhibit it as seeing it as art. So the idea is see first, name later. Okay?
Or don't name it all.
Or don't name it all. But we do that, right? We try and organize our world by putting things, into classifications. So this is a quilt. Mary Lee Bendolph is one of the G's Bend quilters. So G's Bend.
There's a stamp, right? A postal
Oh yeah,
stamp?
yeah. These are women that were descended from slaves in this tiny little bend on a river that was isolated. And so they did what they were doing, and they didn't see what anybody else was doing. And what they did was phenomenal. So it's, this was made in 2002, but at the time she was probably in her late 80s. And so some of the work, I mean, it's just, it is in museums now as, as abstract art. And these were just made out of scraps and made because they wanted to make things of beauty and function. This is a fragment of a Japanese boro textile. So almost every culture, I think, that has a fabric culture, any kind of weaving, has this culture of repurposing fabric. And if you've woven anything, you know what's involved in it, and you don't want to waste that. It's precious, it's a lot of time and materials and effort. And so these textiles were repurposed and stitched together and used in all kinds of ways. The one I like the best is that they were made also for women to lay on when they gave birth, so that the baby is welcomed, in this way. Magdalena Abrakanowicz, she's sort of like one of the godmothers of fiber arts, and so just to show you that fiber art doesn't have to be flat and foldable. Annie Albers from the Bauhaus movement also, brought out not only these ideas of textile as function, but textile with beauty and for the wall. Even though we had, historically we had tapestries that were wall pieces. But the Bauhaus movement sort of brought this up to another level. This is a Japanese artist. I'm going to massacre the name, so I won't try it. Unless you want to say it.
Yoshiko Jinzen Sí.
Okay. So these are quilts. They look like weavings, but they're quilts. And they're on a very large scale. This is like a whole wall of a building with a very tall roof. And, you know, again, this idea of line and form and shape and this sort of minimalist color, I think this is spectacular. So I don't know if anybody got to see this show. It was at the Denver Art Museum a couple years ago. Nick Cave is considered a fiber artist. Well, fiber arts have sort of glommed onto him. But he makes these fantastic costumes that are meant to be performed. And they're called sound suits. And so there is sound that goes along with them from the materials, but also, you know, other sound. Beaded, crocheted. He uses, you know, kids' toys to embellish them. They're really fantastic. This is a Korean artist who lives and works in the States, Chung Kim. And this is contemporary, but this is based on a Korean form of piecing and stitching called bujagi. And again, it's just, it's like the construction and it's the stitching on top and the color. And I think that's really gorgeous. This is the same artist, but this is made out of felt that's formed and maybe screen printed first and then formed. This is a friend of mine, Jan Carson from Fort Collins. These are, she doesn't like the word quilt. I don't mind the word quilt. The form of quilt within the fiber arts realm is a backing fabric, some kind of stuffing, batting, and then a top that's usually pieced. And then those are stitched together, quilted together to form a quilt. So her pieces don't have that batting, and they don't have the backing, but they are all pieced. And they're pieced out, that's a detail shot, they're pieced out of like 1/4-inch strips of silk that she's hand dyed. And yeah, she's a master of color and anyway.
It's a little like collage.
Yeah, except, yeah, and her technique is, you know, like she stitches these tiny little ribbons of, you know, she cuts everything and stitches and then cuts again and stitches and cuts and stitches. This is an Australian artist. I saw this in a show recently, and the thing I like about this is that in the quilt world, there's very traditional quilts that are repeated blocks. And so you can see the block here. That's a 9-patch. So there's nine squares. And that's a really old traditional American quilt. The first quilt I ever made was for my son's bed, and it was a 9-patch. And so I'm kind of fond of it. But then she's kind of mixed it up with silk screening and different kinds of stitching and stuff. This artist, I don't think I've ever seen another quilter do this, but so the background is all pieced, and then these lines are couched. So there's something else. I haven't seen these in person, but there's something else that's laid on top and then stitched to form those strong lines. This is another quilt that's all pieced. And curved piecing is not easy. Nancy Crow is, she is probably, if the G's Ben and Annie Albers were the godmothers, she is the queen of quilting. Nancy Crow's work hangs in a lot of museums. They're quite expensive. You know, you could pay upwards of $50,000 for a small piece of hers. She's a fantastic artist. She's a fantastic teacher. She doesn't just teach you quilting. She's a fine artist, and she's phenomenal. This is based on, if you want to know, railroads. See, I don't know if that adds anything or takes it away. You know, I suppose it adds a level, but whether it makes it better or not, your appreciation of it. This artist is Katie, I can never say her name right, Katie Pasquini Massapust. She's also like a quilting phenomenon. She's a workhorse, she's got books published, she does workshops, and very busy lady. This piece is a triptych that's hanging in Gateway Canyons Resort in there, outside their dining room. And it's based on that palisade. And I just thought that was, you know, something that would, I think it's a remarkable representation of something concrete. Okay, enough about those people. So, this is a little bit about the genesis of the work that's hanging here. Like I said, I don't want to go on and on. I don't want to keep you in your chairs too long, but this piece is actually from a real place. So I didn't interpret it quite as literally as the previous slide of the Palisade, but this is on the other side of the valley. This is Sawatch Creek, and there are Native American prehistoric stone foundations. It's an archaeological site. It's part of the Rio Grande National Forest. I mean, if anybody wants to go see it, I can tell you how to get to it. But so that's what this represents. These are the stone circles of the foundations with the creek in the bottom, and then the bluffs on either side of that little valley. So I didn't put your picture up here, Bill, because I didn't want to, like, you know, avoid copyright or anything. But you know, I live in the Grants. I have this big sky. I feel like I'm in this dome, and so the horizon has become really important to me here, more so than it ever was when I lived in cities, because I never could see it. And so I can see the weather roll in, I can see the light change, I see how the light moves, you know, with the seasons. And so that's just kind of my attempt at reflecting those colors in that sky kind of shape. This piece I don't own anymore, but it's kind of, you know, from this mapping part of my life where we had to collect a lot of braided streams in parts of the world where streams braid like that. And so that's kind of an interpretation of, you know, what it looks like and how it might be collected in a mapping application. And that piece is, it's a very abstracted sort of divide. So drainage systems, you know, flow downhill from a mountain peak. And this is kind of what they look like when you're looking at satellite imagery. And it took me a long time. I still, you know, my eyes aren't used to it. But this is the peak. This is the mountain ridge. And this is down. And so these actually read this way. But, you know, the first time you look at that stuff, for many people, it looks the opposite. It looks like this is downhill. And, you know, a little bit about my process. I think I get ideas from nature. I get ideas. I used to work a lot more from internal stuff, you know, dreams or feelings or whatever. Now I'm just very shallow, and so I respond to nature, or, you know, whatever it is outside of me. But I sketch. I have ideas. I write them down. I sketch if it's, you know, something I really don't want to lose. And then they kind of percolate, and when they're ready to be made, by the time I start cutting fabric, I mean, I put out my palette, you know, I kind of get myself organized, but by the time I start cutting, I pretty much, most of the issues have been resolved, and then it's just a matter of making it. And this might be, you know, this might be an inspiration for a future quilt. You know, again, the lines, the colors, and, you know, I mean, I like these earth, you know, kind of muddy, dark colors. This is Old Town Giva in Uzbekistan. And I just, you know, again, if this is something that I might have been mapping, you know, and so looking at the image like this, probably sketching it, I would put in things that I might be might have put in on a map that you wouldn't just maybe see from this. This is the Oculus in New York City by the new, what's it called, Freedom Tower, the 9/11 site. It's actually 2 pictures, but again, that might form the basis of inspiration. That's Ellis Island. And that's the kind of stuff I could see, cooking for a while and then coming out. That's it. Any questions over here? Yes,
Are you going to explain how you did that piece over there?
if you want.
I would like for you to tell us about.
Okay.
I look at that thing and I can see an enormous amount of detail, painstaking, something happened in your hands.
Should I let him believe that? Okay. Actually, of all the pieces here, that was the easiest one to create, and I'll tell you why. So that, and if you haven't gotten up close to it, I urge you to get close to it, because a lot of the stitching you can't see from here. You have to really get on top of it. But that's one piece of cloth, so it's a whole cloth quilt, and it is a technique that's used in many cultures called discharge. And so you use a chemical to remove color from fabric, remove the dye that's in the fabric. So, I mean, I masked it out, there's masking involved, but a lot of it is just sort of troweling on or applying this discharge in a way that I would get these, lines and some texture. So it wasn't completely accidental. I mean, I did it on purpose, but it's really, of all of these, that's the least complicated, just because it's a single piece of cloth. And then there's stitching, hand stitching on top of it.
For people who don't know what you mean by discharge, might you say just a few more words?
Yeah, so have you ever washed clothes accidentally with bleach? That's discharge. So bleach is something that you could do in your house. You could take a black t-shirt, tie it up like tie-dye, and spray it with bleach, diluted bleach, and then put it in a vinegar bath and take off the rubber bands, and you would have a discharged piece of fabric. So I wouldn't recommend, if you're going to do that, do it outside and don't breathe the fumes. So this was a commercial discharge paste. But yeah, there's lots of simple ones out there. So, any other questions?
I'm interested in your path as an artist. You said you went to art school as a second,
Well, I call it my first midlife crisis.
Right.
Yeah.
And to finish my question, how it relate? I mean, you talk about taking some sort of inspiration from the mapping world in that aspect of your professional life, and I'd be interested to get some impression of how they come together for you.
Okay, so in my family growing up, my dad was an artist, a writer. He was involved in local theater, so he was a very creative man. And there were 4 of us siblings when I was growing up. I'm the youngest. My brother was my dad was an athlete too. My brother was the athlete. My next oldest sister was the musician. My dad was also musical. My next older sister was the painter, and I got stuck with writing. So I don't know why. I don't know if other families do that, but we had one of these, one of those, and I was left with being the writer. And so my first degree was political science and journalism, and I wrote a lot. Maybe that's why I don't like words so much anymore. But and my mom was equally creative, but she was equally creative in a 1950s housewife sort of way. She was a fantastic cook. She taught me how to sew. She taught me how to embroider. She taught me to love textiles. Everywhere we traveled, my mother would buy, she's the one that was buying the carpets or the, the silk embroidered, outfits. And so, but I didn't recognize that until much later. And then I had a neighbor who was making a quilt. And I had not really, well, actually, it's not true. And I was probably about this big. We went to Gettysburg, and I was allowed to get a souvenir, which was, like, hallelujah, right? So I bought this little kit that was to make a quilt for this little 4-poster bed that a troll doll could sleep in. And so that was actually technically my first quilt. It was about this big. But anyway, so a friend of mine, after my son was born, I probably should have mentioned that having a child was the biggest creative, impetus in my life. He's sitting back there.
You're welcome.
That just sort of, I had been working in software, and, it's a very, kind of rigid, you're by the clock, you do, software, you follow the rules, it's one line does the next line. And then I had a child, and it was like, oh, well, all bets are off. I started taking pottery classes and drawing classes, and, these were all things that I had never done because I was the writer. So, anyway, and then I made my first quilt for him when he moved from a crib to a bed, and it was this big. No, it was it was a real size, and that just that just got me hooked. And then I wanted to do it. I saw what contemporary quilters were doing, and I wanted to do that. So I went back to art school for that reason. I wanted to know. I had my favorite teacher said, that the student must deny the teacher, that you learn what the foundation is, you learn what the rules are, and then you break them. And so that's the experience I wanted. I wanted to know the rules, and so that I could make informed decisions about how I chose to work. So, so this work is informed by landscape. All of these pieces are informed by landscape in some way, from either looking out my window or looking, at satellite imagery. Before that, they weren't. They were, just kind of inner monologue. Sometimes very, not very exciting stuff, but anyway. Anybody else? Okay.
Lauren, talk about your stitching. It's really
My
interesting.
stitching?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't figured that one out. I started it, like everything else. When you cook, you add layers of flavor, right? When you paint, you add layers of paint. When you're quilting, you don't really have layers. You have, layer. And it's something that in some of my older work, I incorporated drawing with transparent fabric and wax and all kinds of things. So I had that. I had those layers and that depth. But so that sky piece is the first one that I did this kind of stitching on. When I made it, I was happy with the idea of the color and everything, but it was just so kind of in your face and so flat that helped me do the stitching to kind of knock down some of that color and sort of create this layer of hopefully more interest.
When you're using the stitching, is that silk threads?
It's not.
Fiber?
It's a cotton.
It's a cotton thread?
Yeah, embroidery thread. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of what the material I found available locally, and I really like it.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of staying with it for now. Anything else?
I used to think a quilt was a piece of cloth.
Well, it was many pieces of cloth.
Well, I didn't realize that there was such incredible artistry in all of this. I first got blown away when we went to a quilt auction.
Yeah.
I went with Mara, and she got this incredible cathedral thing that looked like a cathedral glass, and it was cloth. It was just the most amazing thing.
Yeah. For those of you who haven't heard about it, the Amish down near Lahara have an annual quilt auction to benefit their school. Every year, it's the weekend after July 4th. And it is just, it's my idea of a really good way to spend a day.
She was a thief. She got the best one in the
I think I did. Yeah. But, you know, and the Amish quilters are renowned. And they don't use machines. Everything is by hand. So, anyway, I would urge you, if it's really fun. You don't have to buy anything.
Is all your stitching machine then?
Other than the surface embellishment, yeah. And I honestly, you know, my mother, I made quilts for my parents, and they were machine made and machine quilted. And my mother, you know, thought that the handmade quilts were really better because they were hand stitched. And she loved my quilts, but they were not hand stitched. So, but you know, honestly, I like, you know, like the quilting on that quilt is machine quilted, and you know, on some of these, I like that hard line. I like that, you know, that definite line that you get with a machine. And so this hand stitching for me is a new thing, and I like that too. And I really like doing it. It's very meditative, and you know, so.
Save that for the embellishments.
Huh?
I saved the hand stitching.
Yeah, I honestly, this cathedral window quilt I bought, I cannot imagine doing all that by hand. All this handwork that you will never see, you know, the inside seams.
She literally stole it.
Yeah, so, anyway, so yeah, I'm a fan of my Bernina. And I don't, you know, I do think hand stitch is nice, but it's, you know, it's not what I do.
But you do some, I mean.
Yeah, but not this. I mean, it,
Right.
you know, people used to make clothing by hand, right? Every seam, you know, it's like I don't mind doing a hem, but this idea of, you know, I'm not a purist by any means. So. Yes.
So speaking in terms of inspiration, well, okay, I have two questions. What's the time span represented here, and how long have you been working with landscapes?
So, so I worked until I'm on my second gap year. I don't like the R word, but I'm not working. So after I stopped working and kind of got over it, I had a hand injury. But so those four, and there were some others I didn't hang, but those four were actually the middle three were completed in 2016, along with four other ones that I don't have here. And that one and this one I finished this year. In addition to making a double-sided queen-size bed quilt for somebody in this room as a wedding gift. So you know, that was the better part of 4 months. You know, so I didn't think I really had a lot of work, but then when I looked at it, I was pretty productive, you know, in the last year and a half. So I'm kind of on a roll now. And landscapes, I mean, really, this is it. Before that, they were not landscapes. Yeah.
How do you anticipate your trip to Peru?
I'm not sure. I like to travel and I like to do textile type trips. And so I'm going to Peru this fall. Never been. I've wanted to go since I was a teenager. And I'm going, it's specifically a weaving, it's a gathering of weavers from all over the world. And Peru is like, in the world of textiles, Peru is in the top 5, you know. Well, there's probably a top 10, so, but anyway, they're one of the big destinations. So I'm gonna take some workshops. One of them is a knitting workshop on this bobble knitting. I don't know if you're familiar with that technique. I've only seen it finished. I've never seen it how it's done. So I'm excited to learn that. I'm gonna take a backstrap weaving class, which I'll probably never ever do again, and a spinning class. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure that there will be textiles that find their way into my suitcase, mostly weavings. I don't know. I mean, you know, the colors are probably gonna be a big, I mean, I love all those colors. I love, you know, I love red and black and yellow and white. I love, you know, I like all of that. So I'm not sure, but I'm sure it'll have some impact. In my pocketbook, at least.
So is anybody showing your work?
No, you know, I mean, after, you know, when I was working long hours and traveling a lot for business. And so the only thing I could really, that I had steam for was knitting. I could take that on a plane with me. So I feel like I'm not starting over, but starting again. And for me, the purpose is not to show, it's not to sell, it's to be involved in the process and to see where it takes me. And I applied for and was accepted for an artist in residency program in the spring. And so I have a line of work that I want to investigate along with that. And I'm going to be working with some natural pigments. So maybe along these lines, you know. But instead of using chemistry to take color out, using natural materials to put color in or on. And so, you know, I just want to use these things for now. And so yeah, I had a showing for Collins, but you know, it's hard to get. It's not common to see fiber art in galleries. You know, it's tough to get in galleries in the first place, and it's a tougher sell, you know, to sell fiber art. So it's not my main focus right now. I just want to have fun, me and Cindy Lauper. So.
So would you do a commission piece?
Yeah. As long as it's, well, I would say as long as it's not pink, but I could probably do pink. Somebody wanted a pink and green piece one time, and it was a challenge. I was younger then. I had very strong opinions. So, anyway, well, thank you all for coming.
Oh, thank you.
It was fun. It was nice to share what I have to share. So thank you.
Thanks.